All right, my name is Jeff Anderson, and I am one of the lawyers for a very courageous survivor that filed this lawsuit this morning in Federal District Court. To my right is A.W. Richard Sipe. He is a former monk at St. John's, a psychotherapist, an author of many books, among them Sex, Priests, and Power, and others, and has some personal knowledge both of this individual and the culture from which this offender flourished, and he'll address that. To my left is Patrick Wall. He is also a former monk, priest of St. John's. I think 15 years in total there. And he'll tell you of his experience, both about that culture and the problem that we're trying to address with this suit. And because they know so much and have dealt with this grave problem for so long, I want you to hear from them.
Today's a sad day that a survivor of Abbot Timothy has come forward, but it's also a very happy day because it's a day that we get to talk about the culture of secrecy, sexual secrecy that we had at St. John's Abbey. And it's a problem that we need to face. We need to look back now at our history and to see what really went on. In my 15 years experience of knowing Abbot Timothy and of being at the Abbey, you have to remember that 2 of the last 4 abbots at St. John's now are alleged molesters. 2 of the top guys at St. John's were molesters. And when you are abbot of St. John's, you are just not a religious superior. You're in charge of a liturgical press. You're in charge of a high school. You're in charge of a university. You're in charge of an ecumenical center. You're in charge of thousands of children. You're in charge of hundreds of monks who have exposure to thousands of children every day. Because the Abbey has international links from missions in the Bahamas and in Japan and in Mexico, sending monks all over the world and covering parishes, just not the northern part of the United States, but all over. If we had a problem with a monk, I mean, sometimes they ended up in San Bernardino, California. They would end up in interesting places. And so now, with the courage of this survivor coming forward, we get to look at this culture of secrecy. We get to look at St. John's. We get to look at an assignment history of a monk who really now gives us a playbook for how perpetrators are moved around.
My name is Richard Sipe. I went to St. John's as a student in 1946. I was the personnel director of the Abbey from 1967 to 1970. I did not know of the sexual abuse that was going on at that time. But last October, a man from New York called me. He had seen my webpage and some of the comments of the history of St. John's that I had published. And he said, I want to talk to you about Father Kelly, who was pastor, or who was at our parish in 1968 to 1972. And little by little, we talked via phone and email. And he told me eventually that he had been sexually abused in confession by Abbot Timothy. And he knew of between 4 and 12 other students his age who had been sexually abused. What has happened to me is that it is defined and definitely defined the context in which sexual abuse of minors by priests takes place. It is not the 60s or the 70s or any other general culture. It is the culture of secrecy of the church. It is the clerical culture of secrecy in which truth cannot be told. And the cause comes from the top. Sexual abuse of minors is not a problem of young men coming into the priesthood and sexually abusing. If there were no sexual activity and no sexual permissiveness from the top, there would be no priests sexually abusing minors. It is a problem, the cause of which comes from the top. In 1992, I made a statement to the First National Convention of Survivors of Sexual Abuse by Priests. And I said that the problem of sexual abuse by priests, which we see, is the tip of the iceberg. And if you follow it to its foundations, it will lead you to the highest corridors of the Vatican.